Decarbonization Disruptors podcast. I am your host, Matthew Cohen. Thank you for joining me. I am beyond excited to take this crazy podcast journey with you, and I am very thrilled to introduce our first guest on the podcast, Katie Hoffman. Katie is the co-founder, president, and COO of Phaidra. Phaidra is an artificial intelligence virtual plant operator that focuses on optimizing mission-critical facilities for plant stability, energy efficiency, and sustainability. Katie, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm really happy to be here.
Yeah, no, I really appreciate taking the time to do this and being our inaugural guest. As we talked about earlier, our firm has been working with your company to make some great placements. We're excited to be a part of that. And so to have you on the podcast to kind of share your experience and your journey is going to be, I think, really great for our audience. So I was really interested in understanding more about your background because you have a very interesting story. You come from the corporate world. You've moved over to Phaidra. I'd love to hear about how you went through that journey and especially how you went from, senior management at Trane to, becoming the co-founder of Phaidra.
Yeah, it's quite funny. I think a lot of times luck has a pretty big role in just about everything good that happens. Especially with careers, there's always some aspect of luck involved, and I do feel very strongly about that with starting Phaidra. But maybe the best way to get to how I ended up here is to look a little bit about kind of where I came from. I actually started my career, my degree is in mechanical engineering, my undergrad, and I started my career in what I think is referred to as entrepreneurship in the defense industry. So I was working for Raytheon up in Rhode Island and Massachusetts. And I got this internship and then, eventual role with Raytheon focused on new technology insertion. And they basically had an innovation kind of think tank. And so I was part of this group that was focused on just figuring out how we can solve really complex problems that there's no budget for. Which is really difficult in the defense space. And so I started out being very kind of creative, I think, from an engineering perspective. And that was really powerful. I really enjoyed it. I remember my mentor and my boss at the time, she had asked me to go and join the mechanical engineering directorate. And it was quite funny because she was like, you need to go and spend some time doing like the detailed engineering, at kind of like the boots on the ground level. And that was really eye-opening for me, transition moving from entrepreneurship into actually doing like more of the mechanical and systems engineering work, because it really gave me a strong foundation in, if you're going to do any sort of change, you really need to understand the details. You really need to understand, especially as an engineer, the technical aspects of what you're doing.
Right.
And so, I basically spent the majority of my career working in very, very large organizations. I worked at Raytheon. I worked at a number of other, defense contractors and industrial companies, most recently, including Ingersoll Rand and Trane.
Right.
And most of it was boots on the ground sort of work. So I really found controls and systems engineering to be the area that I very much enjoyed the most. And so, most of my career was moving in that direction. And when I was at Trane and I was basically looking at, probably hundreds of control installations, anything from like K through 12 schools all the way up through to, large military installations and hospitals and everything else in between. I just had a lot of exposure to going in, spending time with operators, spending time solving really complicated, control problems, putting those things into practice and into the field, like solutions into the field. And I always had this sort of like piece to me that was reflecting very heavily back on how do I take all of these things and that I've learned and that I'm passionate about, and how do I make more of an impact? I got involved with ASHRAE. I was leading engineering teams at the time. And I found out that Trane and Ingersoll Rand had an innovation team. So I was like, oh, entrepreneur, like I could go back to that. So I applied and I got accepted into that team, and kind of went full circle, went right back into, hey, how do we do new technology insertion? Except instead of in defense, I was focused on the industrial control space, and it is a really great experience. Basically, just taking all of those years of being out in the field, doing control installations and design, and looking for ways to apply that technology, at a in a way that had like a little bit more impact from the corporate level.
Sure. Okay.
And eventually I started Phaidra, which we can get into at any.
Yeah, for sure. What I was curious about was because you mentioned that you got into entrepreneurship kind of early on. Was it kind of always the goal to get to a place where you helped, found a startup, or did it sort of happen organically?
Man, I knew nothing about the startup world. I knew nothing about starting my own company. I took a class my senior year of undergrad in entrepreneurship, and but I had there was no part of me that was like, oh, I want to learn what it's like to start a company. It was I think for me, I've always just wanted to solve problems. I've always wanted to be involved in things that were having the most impact. And I honestly just always thought about it in terms of working at large corporations. I think, one thing that probably, well, most definitely led me in the direction of starting Phaedra was the same thing that led me to finding that Trane Ingersoll had an innovation team. I had read back, it's a long time ago, but I had read a book called How to Make a Spaceship uh, uh, by what was her name, Guthrie, Julie Guthrie, and it had this sort of, it was about the founding of the X Prize, and it had this really profound impact on me around the only way that things get done, the only way that large things change, is if people put a lot of effort into it. They don't just kind of happen randomly. And that's kind of the thesis in which I've always operated my career. Is I've always looked for the bigger things to tackle.
Hmm.
And I basically just use that sort of kind of internal like acceleration to go after really interesting problems in whatever organizations I was in. And when I was at Trane, and I was on this team. I had started an initiative, an open innovation initiative between Google and Trane to try to take some of the technology that was being done at Google's own data centers and wind farms, and use that same technology for commercial buildings. And that was actually how I met Jim and Veda, my co-founders, because they were, they had this sort of set of projects that they were doing while they were at DeepMind, and they had their organization called DeepMind Energy, and they're looking at using this technology that came out for with DeepMind for AlphaGo, if you're familiar with that at all. Uh,
Hmm. Sure.
and they're using that technology basically in order to help basically fight climate change was their mission. And met them, and we started working together between Trane and Google, and we over the course of probably half a year, more than that, working together, we realized that there's a lot more places that what we're interested in could have application. And so hey, AI can really be something that's impactful beyond just cat videos for Google.
Sure.
And how do you productionize that, how do you operationalize that sort of stuff. So that was kind of a little bit of a segue into starting Phaedra.
Yeah, I was going to ask you because obviously all your co-founders come from different worlds. What was the moment where you realized, hey, we can make something of this. We can start this, and it's a big deal to leave. I'm sure a great situation to train and go and do this. What was the kind of the aha moment to say, yes, this is the time to make the change and help start this company?
I mean, in all honesty, I think that it's really, really difficult to affect change at large companies. I think that, you know, when you're dealing with control infrastructure or control design that takes 10, 15 years for them to do even just a moderate update on, on like the hardware. Maybe software updates are, every few years, every 5 years, and they're not very significant. It's really hard to influence the sort of change that you would need in order to apply and leverage this sort of technology at scale. And
Mhm.
the at scale part is really important. And so I think for us, we were focused on commercial buildings, which there's a lot of great applications for that. And there's a lot of companies working in that space. But we saw this as we have the unique trifecta of skill sets that we can apply to bring this to the broader industrial space, to a lot more areas that could have fundamental impact. And the only way we're going to do that is you got to create it from scratch. And so for us, starting Phaidra was something that basically happened just from seeing, one, how hard it is to get large companies to make investments into,
Sure.
basically almost moonshots.
Mhm.
Um, and you really need to have the right mix of people that are focused on that, and so you need a lot of investment in order to do that effectively. And so, luckily, Jim had a lot of knowledge about startups, and as Phaedra's CEO, he was very, very well positioned from the very beginning to basically be like, here's how we're going to go about this, here's how we're going to get investment dollars, here's what we need from, like, legal perspective and from advisor perspective. And so, I do think that we we were able to kind of hit the ground running with Phaedra because somebody understood the startup realm, and that was
Sure.
definitely, and I think Veda as well too, coming from Google and DeepMind and working at startups themselves. So I brought the domain expertise and the really the understanding, I think, of the customer base, because we're very focused on the industrial operators as our folks that we work with.
Right. No, I mean, it's a great story. I'm curious what transitions you had to make going from that corporate world to, someone that's on the co-founding team that did not come from that sort of tech world. What challenges did you come across? How did you have to adjust to kind of be in the role that you are in now?
Yeah, the biggest challenge was starting to use a MacBook. I'm just kidding, but it's kind of a running joke at our company, because we have a very strong mix of folks who come from the tech space, and then folks who come, obviously, because you help us a lot with bringing in folks from the domain and industrial control space. We do use MacBooks, and we're very tech savvy like that. So that was definitely a learning curve as a Windows user, but now I love it, so it's great. But jokes aside, I think that the mind shift that had to happen wasn't as extreme, I think, for me.
Hmm.
And I think part of that is because I always, like I said, I tend to go after doing things that are probably way bigger than what I should, or any sane person might go after.
Sure.
So, basically going into these things with a super open mind, understanding that there's a lot that you don't know, and you got to figure out how to know it as quickly as possible. And just kind of being able to shift prioritization in your mind almost constantly of what you're focusing on, what you're looking into, being able to go down into like the weeds and then come back up to the 1,000-foot level kind of constantly. So there's a lot of kind of brain training there. But uh,
Right.
I think it's definitely a shift in the sense that you are completely in control of your future, especially early on when you start a company, before you've got lots of investors and board members and everything else that comes in the mix of stakeholders. When we decided to leave and then start a company, right? It's basically like kind of jumping off a cliff, because you're like,
Sure.
everything that was your foundation, right? Even just simple things, not so simple, but having health insurance, and having a job, like a paying job, you don't have any of that. And so there's this motivation to say, okay, we have to write, what is our hypothesis, what is the commercial hypothesis of what we're trying to do, where can we get some pre-seed capital, and then what are we going to do with that pre-seed capital to enable us to get to that next phase. And now you're on this roadmap journey of, you are somebody who left a very, very large company and you don't have any experience running a company, to you can handle all of the governance practices that are required for doing this well, and actually, growing enough to be able to support teams of people. I mean, Phaedra's 100 people now. If you were to tell me 5 years ago when I was, at Trane, that I was going to have 100 people basically underneath, my jurisdiction in 5 years, I would have been like, awesome. How did I figure that out? How did I?
Right.
So, but it's a lot of work, and it's a lot of responsibility. So
Very cool. I like jumping off a cliff. That might be my favorite phrase. I mean, it's very accurate, I'm sure, for what you had to go through. So I'd love to hear a little more. I mean, you and I have talked before. We work with Phaidra. We know the story, but for our audience, just give us a quick overview of just what Phaedra's mission is, the technology behind it, and how you're differentiating yourself in the market from any of your competitors that you have.
yeah, so essentially what we are, we provide virtual plant operators, and what that looks like from a technology perspective is that we establish remote read write connection to a local control system, and that enables us to send down recommendations every like 10-15 minutes, that are automatically implemented and are constantly focused on improving a specific objective. And we leverage, machine learning algorithms in order to do this. So they reside up in the cloud. So, data gets pulled via a secure connection. Our models then, compute the optimal decisions, in near real time, and then they send them back down, and then those get implemented, and that's happening every 15 minutes or so. And the goal is to it's sort of like a game, right? Where you're saying, hey, algorithm, I want you to reduce the PUE of this data center. And that's what it's optimizing for, but it has to do it within the rules of the game. And so we define those rules. We define the board that the AI is playing on. And so it understands, well, here's the edges of the board, and here's how I can move these different pieces of equipment, and here's how I can adjust these set points. And it's really just making very high level changes, and in order to drive down things like energy intensity. But most importantly for all of our customers is actually around kind of, it's almost a byproduct of trying to optimize for energy. And when you define the rules of the game, you're able to provide a lot more stable control. So we've seen just absurd numbers of stability improvement on how our agents operate these very, very large, complex industrial systems. And we're focused right now predominantly in the data center space. So we leverage our technology for improving cooling systems, and so we have a lot of folks that are domain experts in that. And yeah, so that's what Phaedra does in a nutshell.
Very cool. And I'd be curious to know. I really wanted to ask you, why data centers? Because I'm sure your application is great for other types of industrial control systems. What made you decide to really focus on that area? Was it the domain experience of the people on the team? Was it just an opportunity you saw? Why go full force into that market?
That's I'll come back to the luck thing. It's all of the above, right? It's When we started out, we were very focused very broadly, right? So we were building the underlying technology, the platform that enables us to do this in near real time, repeatably, and at scale. That doesn't matter. We don't care what the application is, right? It could be digester optimization for in a pulp and paper plant, or it could be like chemical reactor optimization of some sort. It could really be anything. But we do have a lot of domain expertise in cooling systems, and we do have a lot of domain expertise in data centers. And it just so happens that because of all of the breakthroughs in a different flavor of AI with large language models, data center growth is insane. It's
I bet.
absolutely,
Yeah.
and because they're growing so heavily, and because they are also very, very much more sophisticated on how they build out their control infrastructure, and it's also repeatable, it's just a really good first kind of beachhead application. And so, we spent a lot of time exploring and learning from all different sorts of customers, but you got to narrow down, you got to pick a vertical, you have to focus, and you have to build for that to cross the chasm. Actually, one of our board members is Jeffrey Moore, who authored Crossing the Chasm. And he's been very, very influential in helping us to stay really focused and think about the market and think about making sure that we're intentionally getting past that early stage that a lot of startups kind of flounder and fail at, because you have to do this repeatedly, you have to do it at scale, so you have to have what's called a whole product. And so, you know, we chose data centers because the the experience we have is appropriate, and the data center industry, there's a very strong pull from the data center industry for this sort of technology, so that way they can do more with less. So it's kind of like the perfect storm of situation for us to be leveraging. And so we're just right place to right time, honestly.
Very cool. I was curious because I want to ask you about kind of the world that you and I have shared for a long time, which is kind of the built environment sustainability. We talk a lot about decarbonization as a movement. Do you think that built environment sustainability in the world is something that gets enough attention in decarbonization? And if it doesn't, how can we get it to the forefront and make it a prevalent part of the decarbonization movement that we're seeing out there?
Yeah, I think the way that you do that is with real solutions and real applications that are actually tackling them. I think one thing that's a little eye rolly that you see out there a lot right now is people doing carbon offsets and things like that. So if you got money, you can just buy carbon offsets. It's kind of the easy button, but that's not really going to move the needle, right? It just looks good on paper.
Right.
So I think the way that we influence more change around getting sustainability to the forefront is by, one, being very forthcoming about what's realistic, and two, actually applying and putting investment into technologies that enable you to do that effectively and in a proven way. So the data's got to be there to say that this is how this is actually having an impact. I think the other piece there is that there's no silver bullet, right? I think, like a lot of things, you have to look at this as a series of roof shots versus just a big old moonshot. You gotta take kind of a multi-pronged approach to how you bring change on the sustainability side. And so it's a lot of small things that companies need to do, and we're definitely doing our part because we reduce the energy intensity, we reduce resource utilization. And so we feel like we're kind of quiet impact to this sort of stuff, because we can slowly improve over time how
Sure.
well these systems are able to operate at a lower energy intensity.
Very cool. I totally agree. You got to do everything, right? You can't pick one thing.
Yeah.
And I think that'll really be something that I think will resonate with. So I want to ask you some AI questions. The first one is, you know, I I read the news and I hear very smart people on TV saying AI is here, it's going to change all of our lives, it's ready to go, and then I hear the same people on the other side saying, except for the fact that there's not enough data centers and there's not enough power to generate the AI computing power that we need. You have a unique perspective in kind of you're in the data center world now. What are you seeing out there? Is AI generally something that is here now, or do you feel like there's a lot of barriers on the power and computing side to get to where we want to be?
I think it's both. I think it is here now. I think that it's a lot easier for larger companies to leverage it. I think that just the other day we had a hackathon, and we had a large number of participants who put forward solutions leveraging LLMs. And so you're just gonna see a lot of use of it in a lot of unique ways. But it's something where the demand for the energy, in order to support the utilization of this stuff is outpacing the ability to provide, to provide the compute. And so what you're going to end up finding, I think, over time, is that there's going to be a lot of consolidation. You're going to see a lot of large companies basically getting first rights to leveraging compute. But the only way to help minimize that is really do more with less. And so, there's going to be regulation challenges where you have to help, cut some of the red tape to enable more data centers to come online. You've got, grid issues with, availability of energy. So I think that it could get messy, but I think AI is here. I think it's here to stay. I don't. It's not Terminator AI, right? I mean, we work in a
Right.
world where we use narrow domain kind of AI, right? It's got to be very, very specific. You got to be able to bound the problem very well. It doesn't use a lot of compute. LLMs and everything that's very popular and being talked about right now, all of that uses a lot of compute. And so I think that's really where you're going to see the impact.
Do you think that the narrow part of AI is something that's going to be more prevalent and invested in because takes less computing power, it can scale better? Do you think that's where we're headed once kind of the noise of AI slows down?
I would hope so, but I think it's going to be very slow, and the reason for that is because leveraging the sort of reinforcement learning that at least Phaidra uses, it requires a significant amount of expertise on like the domain side. It doesn't. Yes, you need really fantastic research teams and engineers to build the solutions, but you really need to deeply understand your domain in order to apply this sort of stuff. So you have to have that kind of perfect ecosystem of things. And it takes a lot of time and it takes a lot of investment. So I think it's going to be slow. I don't think it's going to be like you can't. It's not like where you can just go and pull in a large language model and then do something over a weekend or something. It's I think the narrow AI side is a little bit of a different animal, but it's also more economical from a compute perspective, depending on what
Sure.
you're using it for and the situation.
Very cool. Where do you, without giving away kind of what you're doing now at Phaedra, I mean, where do you think AI is going within decarbonization, specifically in the built environment? Kind of what's the next stage evolution that you would like to see or envision that you think is going to take hold generally in the marketplace?
Yeah, I think things like peak load shaving and things like that are going to be really important, especially on the sustainability side. I think this sort of technology is very, very helpful for anytime when you have a specific objective and you can define the problem really well, and you can apply it in a way that's repeatable and can actually in near real time, impact your solution. I think that's where you're going to see it the most. We're at just this really remarkable stage of a company where we're going to be transitioning to our Series B stage soon. We're hiring a lot. We're looking for a lot of domain experts. We're looking for people who are passionate about driving change within the industrial controls world, that want to see differences in how we operate plants, and I think that the most important thing that we have is making sure that we're continuing to build the right team and having the right expertise. So, we're always looking for talent, that are interested in the areas that we're operating within. And yeah, I mean, we just presented at ASHRAE just like a week ago. We presented at IDEA. These were, big, actually big moments for us because it was with one of our longest standing customers, Merck, the pharmaceutical company, who's currently operating our technology, and it's been running nonstop for the past number of years. It's been like 2 or 3 years now at this point. And so that was a big moment to actually go public with one of our longest and most awesome customers. So I think looking into that is always great if you want to see what the what the excitement's about for us. But we're just going to continue building what we're building and focusing on data centers and focusing on industrial cooling applications.
Great. Well, look, again, I really appreciate taking the time to do this. I learned a ton, even though I've known you for a couple of years. And so I think our audience really appreciate you taking the time to speak with us. So again, thank you, Katie Hoffman, for taking the time. This is the Decarbonization Disruptors podcast, and we'll see you next time.
Thank you. Thank you so much.